Okay, let's kick things off. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for designing AI for humans. Today, we are going to be diving into a simple but very, very powerful idea, which is that AI adoption isn't just a technology challenge, it's a human experience challenge. My name is Suzanne Boyd. I'm the founder and CEO at Anthro-Tech, and I am thrilled to be your moderator today. So excited to introduce you to our panelists. We are going to be talking about one of the biggest shifts happening in product development right now, which is how to design AI features that people actually trust, understand, and want to use. Now, our audience today includes folks who are right in the middle of it. We have product managers, C-suite leaders, designers, engineers, the folks who are making the decisions about when, where, and how to bring AI into products, platforms, and services. So we are going to keep the conversation very practical and grounded and focused on what works. Because I think we all know AI isn't a new thing, but in the last few years, it's really moved from the research labs into everyday products. And that transition hasn't necessarily been a smooth one. I want you to all think to some of the early AI chatbots in customer support. They were often very confusing and rigid. I see my panelists smiling, really frustrating. And that's an example of AI not being a technical failure. The models worked, the backend did what it's supposed to do. It was a user experience failure. So that is really at the heart of what we're going to be discussing today, which is that great AI design isn't defined by how smart your model is or how cool your technology is. It is defined by how well it fits real people and their real world needs. So I am so excited to introduce you to the panel. We are joined by two exceptional thinkers and thought leaders with expertise in UX, AI, human-centered design, digital transformation, both in the public and private sector. So we have Amy Holmes, who is a nationally recognized expert in data strategy, analytics, and public sector innovation, and Greg Nudelman, who is a UX designer, strategist, speaker, and author. His newest book, UX for AI, just came out this year. There it is. I highly, highly recommend it. It offers a lot of practical guidance for how to create AI products that truly work for people. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience. And Amy, why don't we get started with you, please?
Great, thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you today. I have been working with in the public sector and with the public sector for more than 25 years, really using technology to transform the operations of government, and specifically using data and AI to do that. And I didn't start out as and I'm certainly not a designer, or I am not the expert, I would say, like some of my other colleague here on the panel in UX, but I have been the leader and the champion inside about why all of this really matters in the context of public sector, in the way that we deliver service, in the way that we transform government. And so I'm a lived experience believer in this work, and I think it's vital to the way that we look at how we deliver public services in government and at every level of government. And through my career, I've had senior positions at the U.S. Treasury Department. I led a task force on government performance for this U.S. Senate Budget Committee, where I helped to try to change Congress's view about what transformation means, what digital services mean, and how we have to evolve this work in the public sector. And most recently, I was the executive director of the Bloomberg Center for Government Excellence at Johns Hopkins University, where I helped advise mayors, senior leaders across the globe on how to adopt technology, AI, and use data in ways that really are focused on people-centered outcomes and impact. And so I'm really happy to be with you today. I helped build the first user-focused government-wide agile team in the federal government back over 10 years ago, and I became a true believer and have learned a lot of lessons along the way. And so happy to be with you today and share my experience and views and my optimism for this work as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I look forward to hearing your perspective. Greg, what about you?
Hi, I'm Greg Nudelman, and I specialize in creating AI products that customers actually want to buy. I've been at it for 16 years, since 2009, 34 AI projects. I wrote a few books. My latest one is UX for AI. Thanks for the shout out, Susan. I
Yeah.
also have a LinkedIn course coming out called the Snowball Design Sprint from idea to the agentic POC. And that's where we do the whole sort of snowball design sprint framework to actually prove out that the stuff works. I also have 24 patents, and I've generated over $500 million. It's really crazy to say that, but yeah, a lot of money for my customers over the years. And I consult at ux4ai.com, and that is formerly Design Caffeine. And very excited to be here and share some stuff sort of from the commercial side, from the trenches. And my hat's off to you, Amy, for doing it for the government. I can't wait for us to share some inside knowledge here.
100%. Thank you, Greg. Before we get started here, I wanted to point everyone to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to start asking questions as they come up. We do have a dedicated Q&A set aside time towards the end of our session. So, all right, to get us started, I'd like to ask each of you for one provocative statement, which is, what's the biggest misconception you see product leaders having about AI design and adoption today? Greg, how about we start with you on that one?
Sure. I think that probably for me, the biggest misconception is that accuracy or data science metrics is the right way to measure stuff. Like, for example, that accurate AI is what you want. That's actually not the case. Most of the time, accurate AI is too timid and it leaves money on the table, if you will. And there are tons of examples of this in the book and the workshops that I teach. But that's the first thing that we do. We need to look at it from the standpoint of a real life scenario and look at the cost of false negatives and false positive, and at the benefit of true positives, true negatives, to really understand what is the right AI for that particular use case. And most of the time it will be balanced AI, not something that's really accurate or particularly precise, but something in the middle. And that's where you need to figure that out. So don't just say, "Oh, this is accurate. This is great. I'm gonna just use it." That's almost never works.
Yeah, that's great. So going beyond accuracy to usefulness, right?
Exactly. Yes, for real use cases, like you said, Susan.
Yeah, yeah. Amy, how about you?
Well, couple things. One is my short answer, misconception is more data is not always better. I feel like high quality data that might be a smaller data set is always better than I think quantity. And so I think like I also see people bringing all the data together and I'm like, well, what about the quality, completeness, accuracy? How are you governing it? And there's often a lot of questions there. And so I think that's my short answer. But
Yeah.
I also I think that what I'm seeing with a lot of folks in the public sector is that they're really hesitant about jumping in and even learning and using and leveraging these technologies. And I say all the time, like, you can't sit on the sidelines here. This isn't going away. You've really got to build a strategy to slowly, incrementally learn, help your teams learn, pilot, test, understand the real use cases that will impact people in your operations, and build a multi-year strategy to really learn and engage with users and do it the right way. And that's the safe way to do it. One that really manages risks and balances it, kind of the way Greg was just saying. So those are my two kind of misconceptions I hear the most, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think what you're saying in terms of approach resonates or aligns nicely with what I've learned from Greg's book as well. So Let's ground ourselves just quickly in the big picture. We see a lot of organizations that are treating AI design and adoption purely as a technical hurdle. Why do you think AI adoption is primarily a UX challenge, not just a tech one? And Amy, maybe we can start with you on that one.
Great. So it's definitely, I mean, I think for me, UX is a challenge for all technology, whether it's AI or other kind of, modernizations you're pursuing. And governments, despite a lot of work over the last decade or two, really are still stuck in mentality around requirements or more of a waterfall path of developing solutions. And it's only going to make things worse as we move into AI. And I think it really, a lot of the anchor issues I see really start from the procurement level in government for when you're putting out your RFI or your other kind of solicitations. And then it just continues down the path, and you haven't embedded the user experience and those requirements, that approach, that thinking embedded into what you're doing from the start. And just, from my own experience, when I was at the Treasury, we had a huge culture change to really fundamentally shift our understanding and understand the value of why user experience, human-centered design, all of this was so vital to the business of government and what we were doing. And it wasn't just the right thing to do from a public perspective and serving the people. It was also the best, smartest, cost-saving, efficient work to be done. And I think I won the day by showing the example around how much money and time we were saving by working smarter and understanding our users and building them into the development process. It was really a game changer. So it really saved time and money in ways that were really important. And I'll give you an example. So when I was at the Treasury, we had to develop a large-scale government-wide data broker to collect financial data from over 150 agencies every month to implement this new law. And we only had a year to do it. And the last time something like this was done, it took 4 years to do. And so we're like, okay, how am I going to do this? And we're like, well, let's try something new. We have no choice here. We have to work differently. So we tried an agile approach, and it was built on user testing and human-centered design and UX principles. And we built a user testing group from a subset of the agencies who are internal government users of this new system we had to build. And we brought many of the biggest critics to the table to be part of the user group, because we're like, look, we want them. They have thoughts. They might not be our biggest fans, so that's what we want at the table to help us get this right. So we started with a very basic MVP broker. We tested it with the users. They had dozens of suggestions for improvement in our very first meeting. And then we invited them back 2 weeks later, our next sprint, and everything that they had asked for had been done. And this was the shock. This was the, whoa, this is different. And it really made such a big difference. And people were talking about it, like, well, I have more ideas. Let me tell you more. And so, this is just an example of like how culture change really needs to happen. And when people see their feedback being addressed and they get excited about it, you've heard them, they've been heard. And whether that's your internal government users in this example I'm sharing, or it's your people that you're serving, if they see that you hear them and you're addressing their concerns and you're doing something for them, they're going to be your biggest fans. They're going to turn, just like in my example, they turned our biggest critics into our biggest fans and said, whoa, something different's happening here. And, we changed the way government worked from addressing feedback, not in months, but in days. It's a big shift culturally. So it makes a difference. I think that this is how you can build a transformational user community. We were inside government in this example, but we did the same externally, and we found ways to have a base of users who kind of were real technical in our products externally, but we also then did more, had a broader outreach to get people who had no familiarity with the work we were doing. So I think that to me was really an important lesson. And in this example I would just share with you, we launched this government-wide broker, which hundreds of complex data validations, certification requirements, managing $6 trillion of spending. And we did it in a matter of months. And we did it because we work with our users. And it is something that's never been done before. And we're developing in months, not years, building solutions for the fraction of the cost that we had done previous efforts. And this is the culture change, both with the people, how we do it better, more focused, but it also saves time and money in big ways. And that's how I really got a lot of attention around, like, whoa, we have to change the way we work overall, and so it kind of cascaded into more and more adoption of these principles across all levels of our operation, because it works, which is always the best reason, but also save time and money. So like it's a win all across the board. And that's the kind of culture change that I think is really vital to this work, and we have to see more of. And Greg, I'm sure your book probably gives us all the right steps to take on how to do that more in a technical standard. But as a leader, leaders need to understand why this is so important and support their teams in doing it and taking the risk to work differently. So I'll stop there.
Amy, I love it, Amy. Yeah, I think culture change is exactly what is the most important and most profound thing that is happening. And for years we've been selling UX techniques as, well, we're going to decrease your risk by doing a prototype, and we're just going to show prototype to some customers, and we're going to walk them through it, and they're going to give us feedback, and that's how we're going to de-risk your implementation. And the whole sort of PRD to this handoff, PRD to then the mockups to the engineering requirements in Jira, that was all to kind of de-risk and streamline it. And what AI has done is just turn it the topsy-turvy, and that is driving a lot of this cultural change that needs to happen, because the development is no longer the limiting factor, and it is pinpointing the right use case. It's figuring out what the customers actually need, and it's shipping quickly, land, expand, learn, iterate. Right. So the way to really decrease the risk is no longer to take a lot of really smart people around the office drinking lattes for weeks at a time. It is to ship very, very quickly, very small. I just published an article called "The Thin Slicing," and it gives a very concrete use case from cybersecurity, where we took a very thin slice of, instead of 1,000 rules in cybersecurity, we just took 50, and then that allowed us to ship with a very small ChromaDB that were just a few megabytes, and very quickly prove that the thing worked, and then actually provided a solution. It was in a very narrow category, only CloudTrail rules, but that's enough to kind of already prove the ROI and already say that's gonna work. So whenever the customer would search for CloudTrail, we would then insert a little tile, say, hey, by the way, we have this new AI driven thing, check it out. So very, very lightweight implementation. And then once that works, you can learn and iterate and add additional data sources to your rules, and then pretty soon you covered all 1,000. But without that land and expand, you really can't learn. And so the way to de-risk things now is to actually ship quickly and iterate. That is the only way to do it, which is why I put together this Snowball Design Sprint framework specifically to help folks do it in a kind of a systematic way, systematically frame the problem. We use very specific exercises, the storyboard, the digital twin, and the value matrix I already mentioned, to then frame the problem to really understand, is this the right fit for the customer? Do we have the data that is going to make this thing specific use case you're trying to do, make it work? And what is the thinnest slice? And then does the ROI cost benefit analysis is there a risk? Because every time you deploy, AI is a huge risk involved. Can you tell the story? Do we understand the risk benefit profile? Do you have the data? Great. If that's the case, go ahead and in a couple of weeks, create your RAG files, build a very quick vibe coded POC, and then put that in front of customers, because that is what they're going to be reacting to. The static wireframes that people are building with Figma, that's just with lorem ipsum in it.
Yeah.
That's a waste of time, right? Like it's not going to give you the kind of depth that you need. These are very different products. These AI-driven products are not they're not programmed, they're trained. And this is something we need to adjust our entire culture of
Yeah.
product development to fit. So yeah,
Great.
that's my 2 cents.
Well, we're going to talk about testing a little bit later on. I love this dialogue, and at one point, Greg, you shared with me a statistic that I think it was something like 85% of AI projects fail, and I'm just wondering how much of that failure is due to this waterfall type process that you talked about, Amy, or even a mindset that prioritizes or that defines that success means something works from the technical perspective and not the user perspective. And I think that's the mindset that we want to start working on.
Yeah, precisely. And I wish I came up with this, but it was actually from Gardner and Forbes, quoting that. And now MIT just came out with a study that was really scalding. That said 95%. I think that's a bit crazy. I think that's definitely closer to 85% from what I'm seeing. I think they had a very small sample, but again, there's, let's just say vast majority of these, completely fail. And, this isn't just a slight failure or people just kind of like weren't lukewarm. People don't use it. It doesn't answer the use case. It doesn't provide any benefit. It's actually a detriment to what they want to do. And they end up rejecting it for all of these reasons you mentioned, and Susan, and it's a serious problem because this is a unique opportunity, I think, for all of us to really make the most of this amazing, magical technology, and the benefits are there. If you look at something like vibe coding, it's one of the clearest benefit use cases where you can, if you understand the concept of coding even a little bit, you can code something that actually works in hours or days versus versus months and months that used to require it. And it's an incredible force multiplier for anyone who's been in marketing or writing or promotion or again coding. This thing has proven itself, and yet we see this incredibly high failure rate. And that is exactly because, as Amy mentioned, this is a culture change, a culture shift that hasn't happened, and we're using the old three in a box or four in the box process, whereas
Yeah.
we need to change to a much more collaborative, much more iterative process. This idea of land, learn, expand, kind of a thing where we use different techniques to analyze it, perhaps, and really look at the data. Do we have the data? And that becomes the main kind of driver for your project, rather than, well, here's a PRD and let me write some Jira tickets, and then let's take this ponderous month long, 9 months, $2 million later, you discover nobody actually wants it, nobody uses it,
Yeah.
and all you've been doing is testing static Figma wireframes with lorem ipsum in it, and that's probably not a surprise that nobody wants it at the end of the day, because you never actually tested the heart of the system with the customers you were actually targeting.
Yeah. Greg, you just shared a success story around the vibe coding. Can each of you think of an example where a technically sound AI feature actually failed because the UX wasn't right?
Yeah, Amy, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I can take a stab. I was often thought based on something you were just saying, but I think that for me, look, for a lot of the like Gen AI type of applications, a lot of the public sector is really reluctant to move forward with this technology. In the public sector, AI has to work every time and give the correct information to residents every time. So it's such a risk adverse culture. I haven't seen a lot of widespread adoption yet. But where governments have been using AI is for things like you mentioned earlier, Suzanne, is around like chatbots. And the early adaptation of those has been very kind of dismal because they didn't talk or think about their users at all. They didn't ask, they assumed that residents would ask simple scripted type FAQ type questions, but real life is not like that. And people ask complex, emotional, multi-part questions. I've lost my job. my benefits stop. I just moved. What do I do? And
Yeah.
AI is not equipped to answer that in the way that it needed to be. And so that really reduced the trust in these types of tools, frustrated residents and users, and just set us back, I think, because then it was like, oh, now we're really we're risk averse even more. And we're not sure that we trust this technology to help solve problems because they didn't focus on the users and they didn't set up a product and a solution that would do what it was needed. And it was a lack of testing and foresight in understanding and the research that's needed to be able to have done this right. I think smarter efforts are ones that where the government has built a beta tool, tested it very focused, structured with the residents, with the users, saw the limitations, resolved issues, and they started in low risk areas. Like if you're a city, you start in parks and rec, or you start in areas that aren't
Yes.
going to cause harm, perhaps, and areas where you get familiar with it, you use it, you work out the kinks, you figure out how to make it work well, and go from there. And so I think also to Greg's point a minute ago, I think we have to not look for problems. We have to solve the problems at hand. And the big, there's a lot of operational problems that are often like the most frustrating thing that maybe you're dealing with internally, or a frustrating problem externally that residents are dealing with. And if you solve a problem with this, you understand it deeply. Don't go looking for how technology can fit into what your work is and what you're doing. Use it to solve a real tangible problem that people would want help with.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a mismatch that I'm seeing, where people are being sold a bill of goods. They want to say they're implementing AI, and then it's really not grounded in the experience of the people, whether it's internal or external to the governments.
Yeah.
Yeah, my I would say that's like favorite, but probably the least favorite example of it would be IBM Watson for oncology, and it's just launched to a great fanfare to recommend cancer treatment, and it promised so much. It promised to help the doctors analyzing patient data, and it scanned all these literature in there, and it was supposed to do everything. Um, as I like to say, it makes French fries and watches your kid and walks your dog. But in fact, was completely misaligned with the workflows and the best practices. It wasn't user friendly. It just disrupted the routines. It was very US centric, so it didn't account for, the drug availability and the types of drugs that are available in other countries. And a lot of the stuff it wasn't. I'm not aware that it was actually the case with IBM Watson Oncology, but in a lot of places it favors, for example, males over females, or it splits it in a very unfair kind of way. Uh, it uses only kind of male-centric data, for example, for training, and so you end up with this. Now with IBM Oncology, they use synthetic data, so the entire output was just actually recommending incorrect treatment. And it wasn't just ill-suited for the workflows, it was unsafe and incorrect cancer treatment in multiple instances. Uh, and hypothetical data is very, very dangerous rather than
Yeah.
real use cases.
Mhm.
And one example from my recent consulting is to really drive that point home. You don't have to be IBM to really kind of have an egg on your face for this. It is a mid-sized company, cybersecurity. These consultants have come in, and they sold a bill of goods, like Amy said. They made this amazing demo, which was based on
Yeah.
synthetic data, where the system scanned all these logs and would find latency, and and it would say, oh, this is the system has latency and all these things. But when they brought me in to look at it after many, many months of trying to make this work, and it wasn't working, I said, look, let's look at that quote, at that prompt. The prompt literally said, show me latency. And I said, this is the most ridiculous thing. You keep using that word. That's not what, it's like that,
Who would use?
the Princess Bride moment. You keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. That's not latency, right? Like what they've actually done is they've created synthetic data with actual latency because ABC, right? Like they literally put the answer into the data which is not how this thing works. Latency, involves P90 statistics. You need the transaction. You need to say it started from this and ended with this. Most of them fall into half-second range. These things are outliers, right? It's a very different statistical analysis. This, what they called latency was
Yeah.
completely misaligned, and it was all basically because the data was static. They made a lot was synthetic, and they made a lot of assumptions that weren't going to happen. And they made this beautiful cloak, but it was actually the king was naked at the end of the day. The
Yeah.
emperor had no clothes.
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot, right? So when somebody sells you a POC, really look at what is this thing actually delivering? Is this using real bespoke data that only we have, as opposed to just kind of manufactured data that is going to produce a lot of hallucinations and isn't going to really give you what the customer really needs. And
Yeah.
then the volume, right? Look at the volume of stuff. The Watson had the same issue. If you're only training on a thin slice and very regimented data, and actual production data is much more messy, well, you're not going to get nearly the outcome that you're looking for. It's often you got to train on the same data you're expecting to come in during the production time. You
Yeah.
cannot train on like idealized situation and then expect that to work in the wild. It's not how these things work.
Yeah. Well, and when that happens, when there are UX challenges, like the example you gave for IBM, it starts to breed mistrust in AI. And I think that's something I'd like to talk about next, because trust is often mentioned as a key barrier to good UX and adoption of AI. So from a UX standpoint, what design choices can we make to make AI more trustworthy, so people can actually like trust what it's telling you or giving you as an output?
Mhm. I'm happy to start. I mean, this trust concept is brought up a lot, and sort of especially like it's vital in how we're using technology and using people's data to what are you doing with my data? I think that's a question many of us are asking given current events. But public trust isn't built through outreach or surveys. It's earned through responsiveness, foresight, transparency, and care and empathy. And when the government, and I'm thinking with my public sector hat, of course, acts before a harm occurs, it shows that level of responsiveness. And when we use data and AI to anticipate the needs and prevent crises from happening, it demonstrates that foresight that I think builds trust. And so, transparency builds that confidence by showing how and why decisions are made. And really, the care and empathy helps ensure that every action that we're taking within government feels human and compassionate. So these are the things that I think of as I'm thinking the responsiveness, foresight, transparency, and care for how you build public trust in the adoption of this type of technology. But let me give you an example from maybe a personal experience and perspective, and how we translate that into something that, how AI can work on behalf of the public good. So a couple weeks ago, I got a fraud alert on my phone. Did you just attempt a $1,200 purchase in Miami? And I'm like, it's a yes or no. And my credit card's in my purse, and I haven't been to Miami in years. And so I tapped no. And of course, the charge was blocked. Minutes later, my bank followed up. We frozen the card and issued you a new one. You're safe. No money's leaving your account. And, instead of waking up days later and finding my account had been emptied, I was protected in real time.
Yeah.
And the bank didn't wait for me to discover the fraud, didn't send a letter later, all of that. That's the way the government works in a lot of ways. The simple fraud alert was more than a convenience. It was a model of responsiveness powered by data, algorithms, and real-time communication that is keeping trust with our banking institutions and financial system.
Yeah.
Now imagine if government worked the same way.
Yeah.
When a wildfire sparks in a canyon, communities could receive instant alerts, like the bank fraud text. When a family falls behind on rent, before eviction papers are served, they could, get a flag about resources available in their community. When someone applies for social benefits, automated checks could verify eligibility instantly, releasing aid in, days and not weeks. So that's the kind of government responsiveness that comes before a harm occurs,
Yeah.
before a home is lost, before a disaster spreads, before our families and residents sink into crisis. That's the kind of, for me, in the age of AI, as we're going to think differently about everything we do, that's the type of understanding of residents that we need, and we need user engagement on, so that we know our people, we know the people we're serving, we understand where they're thinking, and how to make a safe space for them to interact with government and act before. And so, like, I see so much automation and application of a technology that's based on old ways of thinking. And I want us to think differently, proactively, and how to prevent harm, because AI gives us the ability to do that. We can look and do, and we can have that foresight. And so I'm excited, and I guess I would put a call out to this community of folks here who are more maybe expert in the UX space. How do we get that intelligence? How do we get that research to be able to design public programs in a way that's got that foresight and prediction built in to help people the most? Because that's how you build trust. That is the essence of trust. I've got your back. I'm looking out for you. I'm going to protect you in times of harm. And that's what we need to do more of in government. So that's my soapbox. Sorry, I took you on my journey with me, but that's what I think about as a public servant, is how I'm helping those people, keep them safe.
Yeah, I love those examples because the data is there, and it is a way for government to be proactive and help somebody before they're out of a house or gonna get fined because they missed some kind of deadline type of thing. It's a great example of building trust. Yeah, how about you, Greg?
Yeah, Amy, you touched on so many really incredibly salient pain points to this. One thing I want to caution is, a lot of folks say, well, if AI is just explainable, then unless if it's not a black box, if it's explainable, that's just going to solve everything. That's actually not the case. I think that actually something like GDPR holds a lot of initiatives back in Europe from what I'm seeing, even things like those fraud alerts, because you can't really, having worked for fintech companies like PayPal and Wibmo and many others, it's you can't expose those, because then the fraudsters would know exactly the kind of patterns you're looking for. You literally, it will actually hurt you in the short and long and medium term right away, right? So you can't always make this explainable, and things like self-driving cars will never work in an explainable way. This is, at the end of the day, these things are black box. But what you should be doing instead is making other things explainable, like being able to explain tell a story about every time you use AI. What is the use case? What is it actually doing? Where's it pulling the data? What is it actually doing for whom? And then really understand this value matrix, which is, what is the benefit of true positive, true negative? What is the cost of false positive, false negative? And then how often is this model going to yield each of these outcomes? And then really trying to understand it. If the cost is catastrophic, let's say, of some sort of prediction, then maybe that's not the right use case if you don't have the data that completely covers your your behind, right? You really shouldn't be attempting that. Instead, you should be thin slicing something much simpler. Like that fraud alert is a perfect example, because it's a very uh, very low cost, very low risk kind of a thing. If you got too many of them, yeah, you might say, well, wow, that's too much. But if you're actually using that judiciously, that fraud alert, the false negative or false positive of this is a very, very small amount, right? Somebody just saying, no, that's not it. Unless you get, you get like 5 or 10 of those every day. That's going to
Yeah.
be a problem. But,
Right.
that's a perfect example. And in fact, one example from from my work at GE, we've had this system that they were building. So they spent 6 months building the system where he was going to take over this industrial process was going to be basically run by AI. Right now, it's run by a high tech person in third world country, and it's they don't pay him a lot of money or her, and that person is basically knows this machine inside and out. They've been at it for 10 years, and they know it extremely well. And so the cost of replacing that person, basically, sorry, the benefit of this AI would have been basically replacing this human operator, which would have been maybe 50 to $100 a day. And then the cost of a foul up, basically AI getting it wrong, is in millions of dollars. It would be $6 million if it got it wrong. And they had no data to implement it. So you got the positive, which is $100 a day, and you got the negative, which is $6 million. How do you justify buying AI that is completely not trained on your installation? It just it boggles the mind, right? So instead, what I work with them on is try to pivot that into what I like to call a blind spot indicator, which is exactly, Amy, what you indicated so well in your awesome example, which is it's a blind spot indicator. It's not telling you it's fraud and shutting down your credit card, which would have been very, very risky and
Yeah.
extremely potentially fraught with high high business cost. Instead, it's a blind spot indicator. Hey, looks like you could probably increase the heat and make more of this product you're trying to make. Or, hey, watch out, like it's really about to overboil and you're about to have this follow-up event, and that's going to be $6 million. So what instead the company were able to sell this solution as not as a replacement for this $100 person, um, somewhere in the Philippines, but instead say, look, we're going to be a blind spot indicator. We're going to make sure that if that person gets distracted, we're covering for you. So it's a kind of exactly the blind spot indicator. We cover all the blind spots. We ensure your production stays. The the cost would be like $300,000 per year. Who wouldn't buy a $300,000 insurance if a cost of a single incident is $6 million? But this is what it really gets you. And this is the piece de resistance. It gets you in a door, and then you can start collecting data on this. Every time
Okay.
the person flips the switch, we're now collecting the data on this bespoke installation. And now, you actually can attempt to do more for that person, for that operator. You're still not replacing that human in the loop, but you're now doing more, you're getting smarter. But without that data, just straight from the start, just try to take over and do that. That's just unthinkable, right? So that I think would generate trust, right? Really getting that use case, understanding what is the benefit and cost and risk profile of that AI use. So for every time you use AI as a product leader, you should be able to say these things. You have to say, what is the use case for this? Who is this serving? Where's the data coming from? What is the cost benefit analysis? What is the ROI? Right.
Yeah.
If you can't do that, maybe you really, should talk to somebody about it, because that should be the requirement. Because AI think it's a dangerous opportunity, right?
Yeah.
This is like the two emojis for the two kanji for crisis is dangerous opportunity. So think of that.
Yeah.
It's AI is dangerous opportunity.
Yeah.
So be very careful.
Yeah. We are getting some really excellent questions in the chat here, and I would love to get to those. So I'm going to ask one final question, and I think what the answer is going to be. But we have designers, engineers, product owners in the room right now. Imagine their boss taps on their shoulder and says, I want to add AI to my platform. What is the first question that they should ask? Let's start with you, Amy.
First question they should ask. What problem is it trying to solve? What's the baseline measures today? Like what is the problem you have? What is its status today? And how is AI going to improve it? I think, like, to me, we have to think up front around how what this matters to people, to whatever your mission is. And for my experience, is all about people and communities, and how is it going to make us better at serving people. And so for me, like, if you can't describe the end result up front of how you think this is all going to play out and how you're going to measure it, how you're going to have that assurance, I think and how you're going, do you have the data to do it? I think you have to have that kind of risk assessment and that assessment up front that Greg was just talking about,
Yeah.
all those factors. And I think that's really important. And one other best practice I'm seeing in the public sector, it was related to Greg's thing, so forgive me, Suzanne, I just want to get it in there because I think it's important, is around, I've seen governments setting up resident AI advisory councils, where you engage with your community to help put a check on how personal data can be used by government, and doing it in maybe ways that not everybody in the world wants to understand. You can go deep, and maybe there's some expertise from your community brought in. Maybe there's some average, there's a diverse set of individuals who can come to the table to help advise the government on the best way to leverage this technology and protect public interest and security and safety, and do apply this technology in ways that are smart and are also engaging the people. So I wanted to flag that. I think that's a really good practice, and we should see more of it. So,
Yep, agreed. Greg, how would you answer that question? What's the first question you should ask?
Yeah, I think the first thing we do is we start with the storyboard, and there's a really sorry the a really salient, I think, example. I don't know if you can see it from in the book, but one storyboard is this kind of mental health assistant therapist in your pocket. You're sitting in the cafe, you're depressed, and you pull out your mental health assistant and you answer some questions, and then you magically feel better. Now,
Mm-hmm.
on paper, that sounds amazing. In reality, most people understand this is the depression is a clinical condition. AI simply isn't qualified to answer it. And if you look at the recent news, this is underscored by all these unfortunate poor kids committing suicide because they had AI as an assistant that told them not to talk to their parents, not to share with the therapist, but instead said, "Oh, one more thing, these dark patterns, right? Oh, before you go, let me just tell you one thing, right? Like really pretending to be your friend versus a storyboard. Number two is this example where, the same person may be feeling slight um, social anxiety, and AI helps them to maybe reminds them to smile, and gives them some good opening lines to engage their potential the romantic interest in conversation. Now that is a much better use case because it's something that the human themselves control, right? That they chose to kind of have these goals to be more socially outgoing, perhaps, and the cost of failure is negligible, right? Like there's very little risk, and it's all in the upside. And over time, this thing can learn and really kind of be that helping hand for mild social anxiety. That's a
Yeah.
much better use case. But on paper, both sound amazing. So how do you choose? Well, again, in the book and the Snowball Design Sprint, and thank you, Amy, for shouting that out. Is you start with the storyboard. You really see does the conclusion make sense? Does it actually fit the use case that you heard the customers really complain about? And then we go into the digital twin. We really try to understand where's the data coming from. Do you have the exact data that does this thing you're trying to do to do the thing, right? That's what we call.
Yeah.
Do you have the data to do the thing you're trying to do? And
mhm.
what is the handoff between agents? How does that look like? And and what are the kind of tools that agent is doing? Is this appropriate for the use case? And then finally, it's the value matrix, which is really evaluating the cost and benefit, the ROI, uh, using the real world constraints, using real world outcomes.
Yeah.
Because a lab metrics like accuracy just don't do it. they don't reflect what is happening on the ground. Like that's pretty much um, not going to work, right? You really have to sit down and understand. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know the use case, so I don't know the benefit of this. Well, talk to customers and find out, right? You can have a lot of approximations, like you'd say, well, it's saving me 1 minute of time, or this is using normalized metrics like that. But at the end of the day, you have to talk to your customers. There's just no substitute for it. You have to go out there and engage and rapidly iterate on your use case and perhaps pivot a few times to really
Yeah.
get to it. But the good news is none of these techniques are very complicated. They're very sophisticated, but they're very low fidelity. And I try to make it as uncomplicated as possible. And there's a little bit of high school math involved, but it's really not actually middle school math, but it's really nothing beyond that. It's all about going out there with that empathy, with that desire to help, understanding enough technology to really ask the right questions. Exactly as Amy mentioned, engage with your customers first and
Mhm.
foremost, ask questions, and use these materials as a guide. And if you really need help, could call one of us up, and happy to help.
Yeah. And understand the problem from the customer perspective. Yeah. We have
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better.
we have quite a few questions in the chat. We have space for two of them. And the first one is for you, I think, Amy, from Michelle. We mentioned that accuracy in AI isn't necessarily the key priority. How do you see that perspective aligning or potentially conflicting with the expectations for accuracy in government systems, where a lack of accuracy can have serious consequences, especially when it comes to building and maintaining public trust in services?
Yeah, I think that I believe that it, depends on what you're doing in government. And if you're doing like predictions to help inform, policy decisions, or, you have more freedom to experiment. And I think, like, for me, experimenting, piloting, I ran an Office of Innovation at Treasury where we tested everything and we learned what we broke it. It was a safe place to test this technology in order to figure out how it could work, how it could solve our problems. Greg mentioned digital twins. I think this is another really great way, and I'm seeing governments who have advanced data and who have all of the valuable type of data you need in order to make a virtual digital twin of your location, and being able to test and use that. I mean, that's incredible. And that gives you a lot more flexibility to test ideas, understand the impact, whether that's the infrastructure or the people impact. Um, so I think that for me, like, there is this tension between you must be perfect and accurate. And I certainly felt that in my time in government, where I want to make sure every payment is on time and accurate and the money's moving the right way. And we were very risk adverse, but you still find ways to innovate and test this technology in ways that are safe and that can still allow, progress and adoption to occur. But you must test it more and have a way to manage the algorithms and the testing that's a part of that. All of that has to happen and rigor put into it. And I think we are very at the early stages in the public sector, and we have to mature what we're doing.
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
can I just take 30 seconds to add something to what Amy just said? I love that question because um, imagine imagine this. You're building an AI for TSA inspection. Like, who do you pull aside? And your accurate AI is going to be 99.999% accurate. Will be nobody's a terrorist or nobody is a threat, basically. Nobody should be passed for a secondary inspection because literally you're going to have one bad guy and literally like 46 million people go through per year. In 1 decade, that's 460 million, basically a billion people travel. Out of them, one person was a bad egg. So that AI will be 99.99999% accurate. Incredible accuracy, but it will also be completely useless because it will always just return false. Now, instead, you have folks that are pull people aside And then that's not accurate because most of these people they're not carrying anything, right? They're not a threat. You're wrong, but at the same time, that is how the system works
Yeah.
because that provides now the benefit of being the preventative measure that is going to then make people think twice to try something. That's a perfect example, something that's accurate, completely useless.
Great example. Thank you, Greg. Next question is pretty tactical. I'm going to ask you to respond to it, Greg. You know, in our human-centered design process, we're very accustomed to building prototypes and testing those prototypes, iterating them based on feedback, wireframe, Figma, all of that. How do you think usability testing needs to be transformed when it comes to Gen AI usage in solutions?
That's for me. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I think you can no longer test Figma static wireframes. So this is just like decorations on the building. You're asking you're reducing UX people to asking like do you like this gargoyle rain spout or do you like the lion rain spout? It doesn't matter because your AI is emptying your entire plumbing down the elevator shaft. Uh, you need to ask about the heart of AI. And the only way to do that is to really use the real data with the LLM. Now, the simplest way to do it is get this. You you hand sketch those wireframes just to give people the idea of a flow. And then all you do is you take your RAG registry and you pair it up with your LLM, and that together is your prototype. Because that will already give you the data you're looking for, and you can have the customer actually tell you what kind of query to type in. You would type it in, you would see the output, say, is this what you wanted? This is the flow, basically sketchy wireframes, and then this is the actual output. Does that match your expectations? Do you want it to be this or that? And here's the best part. If they tell you, I want it this way, I want it that way, you can immediately change it right there in the conversation. And then you will have a better output than immediately. And then also you can use that for the next person. So that is rapid iterative testing and evaluation in the new modern way with AI in the middle.
Yeah, fantastic. We are close to wrapping here, and I just thought this was such a great discussion. I feel like we could keep going for hours after this, so we might have to do a follow-up if there's interest. We've heard today that AI success doesn't just hinge on how powerful your models are, how cool your technology is. It really hinges on how well it serves real people. So if there's one takeaway that we have for everyone here is that human-centered design is what turns AI from something impressive and flashy into something useful and valuable. So a huge thanks to our panelists, Greg and Amy. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your case studies, lessons learned, and also thank you to everyone in the audience today for joining us. Please check your email. In the coming days, we are going to share a recording of today's session, along with some resources, as well as a free chapter from Greg's book, UX for AI.
Awesome.
So, yeah,
Yay.
Check it out.
Thank you.
of all of us, thank you for being part of the conversation, and thank you for making AI work for people. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.